Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I am your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and today I want to return to a subject that I've covered a lot in the past, but haven't covered a lot recently, and that's the subject of the Sabbath. So, as many of you know, I was at one time an SDA assistant pastor, and I even was for a very brief time an SDA pastor in a very small rural congregation. But I left Seventh-day Adventism. I have become an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and because of my history, I often address this issue of the seventh day Sabbath and why, from an Orthodox perspective, the Adventist position on the Sabbath doesn't really make any sense, um, as well as clarifying um, all of that. But I've been reading this wonderful book, The Age of Paradise by John Strickland. John Strickland is one of the greatest scholars of church history of our time, and he just has this awesome book. But in this particular section of chapter one of this book, he talks about spiritual transformation. And as part of a broader discussion of how the sort of culture of Christendom was created within the very earliest days of the church. And in this, he actually talks about Sabbatarianism, and he talks about the early church, the very earliest times of the church, starting with Acts and moving forward. And in talking about this, he addresses that the way the Sabbath and the Lord's Day was approached in the very earliest days of Christendom. So I want to read this to you because if you're Seventh day Adventist, then this is actually the way that I would address a lot of your claims. I would love to see in the comments you guys engage with me about this issue of Sabbatarianism and about what Father John Strickland says here. I would also love to engage with any Protestants or Roman Catholics on this topic. But without further ado, I will read this section to you guys. It's very interesting. So, again, this is part of a broader discussion. So you'll be kind of coming into the middle of that discussion, but this section pertains to this topic that I want to share with you guys today. So I highly recommend getting this book, The Age of Paradise, and reading the whole book. Uh, Even just this first chapter is so awesome. Um, and if you guys want, I can cover more of what this book talks about. If you guys are interested, I'm happy to cover more of this book in other discussions. But for right now, I just want to present this to you guys. So, this is on page 50 of Age of Paradise. Spiritual transformation. If God was present in the sacraments of the Church with all of creation participating in the experience, prayer and worship served to order and regularize the principle of heavenly immanence. And even more than that, by integrating worship into the rhythm of the natural world, traditional Christianity served to transform it. Christ himself had offered an example of regular heartfelt prayer to his heavenly Father. He also frequented the Jewish temple during the establishment of holy days that had, for centuries, provided a scripturally regulated pattern of true worship. Indeed, ancient Judaism was not, as is often said, merely a religion of the book. It was also a religion of the temple, and a great deal of its holy book, the Old Testament, was dedicated to elaborating divinely commanded feasts, fasts, and liturgies. Early Christian worship sprang out of this holy tradition. Therefore, Luke considered this worship normative to the church life and listed the prayers, that's from Acts chapter 2, as the fourth and final mark of that life. Note that in Greek, the article is there. It's the prayers. It's not just that they gathered for prayers, but they gathered for the prayers. So it's a specific kind of liturgical prayer. Uh, Going back on with John Strickland. Christian worship had actually started even earlier. The Gospels tell of the disciples gathering together on the very day of Christ's resurrection, the first day of the Jewish week, when the risen Lord had made his presence known among them. Then, 1 week later, according to John, the disciples were gathered together again in what might be called a proto-liturgy, an occasion when Christ imparted to them the gift of the Holy Spirit. But it was, of course, only at Pentecost that the Spirit was given in all his fullness, when that day had fully come. Acts declared the apostles were all of one accord in one place. We are told that prior to Pentecost it was the practice of the apostles and possibly Mary, compare Acts 1:14 with Acts 2:1, to assemble on the first day of the week in prayer. After Pentecost, this apostolic proto-liturgy became the model for Christian worship throughout the world. What made the liturgy complete now was the offering of Christ's body and blood during the course of it. But the regular assembly of Christians in order to participate in the Eucharist was itself significant. The consolidation of a regular pattern of worship created conditions under which Christendom's nascent civilization could begin to flourish. The service at the heart of Christian worship occurred on the first day of the weekly calendar, inherited from the Jews. According to the Gospels, this was the day of the week on which Christ rose from the dead. It became known as the Lord's Day, and its observance documented in the New Testament, see Revelation 1:10. According to the calendar of pagan Rome, it was known as Dies Solis, the day of the sun. Christians did not cease to use this moniker in public, but among themselves a strong preference for Lord's Day, or Kyriake in Greek, and Dominicus in Latin soon took hold. What is more, the Christian self-consciously distinguished this day from the Jewish Sabbath. Though Christ's followers were initially inclined to participate in the established Jewish worship, by the end of the first century, we can see clear signs. We can see clear signs that membership in the church made one a participant in a totally new liturgical experience. As Ignatius put it, quote, "Those who used to live according to the old order of things have attained a new hope, and they observe no longer the Sabbath, but Sunday, the day on which Christ and his death raised up our life." End quote. If the Old Covenant had prescribed a day of rest, the new day of worship called Christians to action. This vitality is suggested in the very order in which the Lord's Day fell within the 7-day week. It was the first day of the week. It was the day on which, according to the cosmologically rich first 2 chapters of Genesis, God had begun the creation of the world. The Lord's Day was in fact the day on which time itself had been created. Before this first day, there had been only eternity. After it, there was evening and morning, one day. Genesis 1:5. The Lord's Day, then, was a day that represented a link between the earth and heaven, between the cosmos and its creator. But if the first day of the week was the day of the old creation, it was also the first day of the new creation. The divinely arranged weekly cycle of time inherited from the Jews was now seen in a new light. The cycle pointed to Christ's work of recreation. The creation, a work that culminated with his death on the cross. It was a work solemnized when, with his very last words, he declared that his divine human ministry was completed. For this reason, the seventh-day Jewish Sabbath that fell only a day after Christ's death could in no way serve Christians as a day of worship as such, for it was a day of rest. On that day, God had once, at the beginning of time, rested, and on that day, too, his Son had rested, buried in a tomb. Christ rose from the dead, not on the seventh day of the week, but on the first, and so the first day came also for Christians to be called the eighth day. There is, of course, no eighth day in the Jewish calendar, and that is the point behind this term's symbolism. For the Lord's Day resets, as it were, the Old Covenant method of measuring time. It propels the earthly calendar beyond itself into the kingdom of heaven. And with this, the created world is reset to accommodate that kingdom. The Lord's Day thus served to reveal the spiritual transformation of the world. In the early second century, if not earlier, for instance, the Epistle of Barnabas imagines Christ declaring, "It is not the Sabbath now celebrated that pleases me, but the Sabbath which I have made, on which, after bringing all things to their rest, I will begin an eighth day, that is, a new world." Some Christians were so inspired by this experience of paradise that they were actually prepared to die for it. In 258 AD, Pope Sixtus II was beheaded in Rome by soldiers when he refused to comply with a ban on worship at the catacombs, being actually pulled from his episcopal chair during what appears to have been a Lord's Day Eucharistic assembly. In another case, it was a group of what one historian has called Lord's Day martyrs were arrested in Carthage in 304 AD under Diocletian's persecution for their refusal to desist from assembly on Sundays. There were nearly 50 in all. When they were placed on trial, their priest insisted on their need to assemble on that day, for as he put it, doing so is a law for us. A reader in whose home the assembly had been discovered agreed, adding, "We cannot live without celebrating the Lord's Day." A virgin named Victoria placed her martyr's declaration within the context of Sunday worship. "I attended the meeting because I am a Christian." I am a Christian. The famous formula of Christ's witness during these centuries was spoken before pagan magistrates, but it was implied simply in the act of assembling on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. Um, he goes on to say the cosmological character of early Christian worship was not limited to Sundays. In fact, all earthly time came to be infused by heavenly worship. By the second century, the celebration of Christ's resurrection had become an event on the annual calendar. It was linked to the timing of the Jewish Passover, though in Rome it was carefully scheduled to take place after the Passover and on a Sunday. With time, the period of celebration after Pascha grew, as did a period of fasting. Before it, the preliminary period eventually became the Great Fast, or Lent. Calendrical fasting was already normative and universal feature in the early church, documented at the beginning of the second century by the Didache, which acknowledges the practice of fasting on Wednesday and Friday. So we see that time itself has been redeemed by Christ, and the calendar, the Christian calendar, is this reflection of this. And from the very earliest times of the church, going all the way back to the book of Acts, going all the way back to the apostles themselves, the Christian calendar centered around the Eucharistic gathering that took place on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. This was the heart of Christian worship always, because the Lord's Day is this cosmologically significant time. It is the day of the resurrection. It is the day in which the old creation was begun and the new creation was also begun. It is the day of Christ's resurrection, the day, as St. Justin the Martyr says, it is the day on which God severed the light from the darkness, and it is also the day on which the light of the world came forth from the darkness of the tomb. Therefore, this is the principal day of worship, not the seventh day Sabbath, which was never a intended to be a principal day of worship. It was principally intended to be a day of rest, which is how the Holy Orthodox Church still sees it, seeing the first day of the week not as a day of rest, but as a day of action. Um, and that action and vivification principally takes place in the life of worship. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that this has been beneficial to you. Please do share your thoughts in the comments. And share this with your friends, especially your Sabbatarian friends, so that they too can be freed indeed. God bless.